Next we have Marion Davis, who is the Communications Manager of the Stockholm Environment Institute.
Most people here, I think, are devoted to advocacy or activism. We're a research institute, and so we're a bunch of researchers and policy wonks, but I do think we have useful information to provide. Our work is grounded in this area on the principle that climate transformation has to come from within. You cannot just parachute in and come up with your own ideas. People have to understand what climate change means to them and act on their own terms. Next. Very quickly, SEI, as I said, we're an independent international research institute. We have about 180 people in 7 centers around the world. Our mission is to bridge science and policy with a specific goal of supporting sustainable development. Our Asia Center, which is in Bangkok, was founded in 2004, and along with doing research, they have an explicit mission to build local capacity. So a lot of their activities involve seminars and training and building networks and doing different things to really bring together Western knowledge with local knowledge and really start influencing policy. As part of that, we did the Regional Adaptation Platform for Asia, or Asia AKP. It was funded by the Swedish government and worked in 13 different countries. You can read them. I can't say that many names so fast. We had a bunch of workshops, conferences, different things, but one of the main things that we did was we worked with research institutes in all these different countries so that they could do their own work learning about adaptation needs in their countries and influencing policy and beginning to implement projects. As you probably know, Southeast Asia and South Asia are very, very vulnerable areas. They have a lot of poverty, they have a lot of people who rely on natural resources, and they also often have a history of turmoil. And many of them happen to be in the way of just about every natural disaster that you can imagine. We built a really diverse network of people who knew their local context and were able to make connections with people in their own language and their own systems. And that's one of the most powerful things about it. We were also incredibly productive. I happen to have edited a large chunk of this, and let me tell you, it took a year. We had over 50 outputs, a lot of reports, a lot of policy briefs, plus a lot of activities as well. And we built a lot of relationships that we have continued to expand on. But we also had our problems. And one of the biggest ones is that our Asia Center had a lot of turnover during this time. And we found that once individual people were gone, suddenly there were not enough people to support these very, very important partners that we had. And this delayed us and undermined the project a bit. We also found that we had underestimated how different these countries are. So sometimes we would have a project that was supposed to compare policies in 2 countries or was supposed to have similar, a similar structure, and we discovered, no, you actually cannot do the same thing in Bangladesh and Nepal, even though they're so close together. And we found that language is a huge barrier, and I'm sure, we've seen a little bit of this today with Polish, and imagine having people from 13 different countries, none of whom speak English as their native language, trying to do a project together in English. It's incredibly challenging. And then in addition to this, as I already mentioned, these are complicated countries. Sometimes you find that, we take for granted, as Americans or as Europeans, that there's freedom of speech, but in many countries there isn't. One of the countries that we worked with, if you criticize the king, you can go to jail for that. There's a lot of different reasons why people have difficulty participating in these projects, and we underestimated them. So how can I do better, and how can the lessons that we learned the hard way teach you how to do better as well? We've gathered a lot of our wisdom in a few policy briefs, and I'll tell you some of the key lessons we shared. First of all, take nothing for granted. Just because you made a plan doesn't mean it's going to work. Just because you think you know a country and you read up on it doesn't mean it's actually the way it works. So you have to go in thinking, you don't know everything. You have to find local people, ask them questions, watch them, try to understand whether they're comfortable, they're not comfortable, and understand what's going on. You have to be prepared to teach and explain things that you may think are completely obvious, and I find it myself, I had a slide in my original, where I used mainstreaming adaptation, I thought everybody knows that. And I was told, no, of course not. And I think we have a tendency, once we know a word, to think that everybody knows it. The other thing is relationships are crucial. You cannot just parachute in. Once you're in a project in a developing country that needs your support, you have to be there. You have to be there long term, constantly, because people may need you when you're not around. And so that's crucial. And the other thing, projects need champions. You need passionate people who really live and breathe this kind of work. And you can't just have one, because if one of them gets sick or quits or gets pregnant or whatever, you can be in real trouble. So you need to have a few people who you can rely on. And the last thing is language, 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 language. Climate change negotiations to a great extent are happening in English. A lot of this work is happening in English. We have to get over that. People may speak some English, but they don't speak it that well. We need to translate a lot more. We also need to think, a lot of the things that we do, we tend to go in for a few months, or even, the really long projects last maybe 3 years, like ours did. You have to have a plan to continue. What are you going to do after your particular intervention is over? And that's part of why it's so important to build local capacity. And finally, it kind of doesn't matter if you succeed or fail. I mean, obviously you want to succeed, but be prepared to fail, and it's okay. Because adaptation is a learning process. Climate change, everything we're doing, we're learning. Thank you.
My first question is, what did you learn that really surprised you? What was the most surprising thing from this project?
I think we had underestimated really just the level of how little climate talk and climate consciousness have penetrated a lot of places, where you might have national governments that are coming here and negotiating really hardcore, but then you go to the province level and it's already kind of non-existent, and you go to the district level and nobody's ever really had a conversation about adaptation. That's pretty striking in such vulnerable places.